Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. Today we're diving into something that, well, it touches pretty much everyone. Cancer. Now, you've probably heard the scary headlines, right? That cancer deaths are rising globally. But what if the real story, the one beneath the surface, is actually a lot more complex, maybe even hopeful in some ways? Our aim today is to really unpack the narrative around cancer progress. We'll be drawing heavily on a recent Economist article, but also bringing in some other perspectives. We want to get beyond the easy summaries and figure out what's really going on and, why it matters to you. So let's start with that main point from The Economist. It's a bit counterintuitive at first glance. They point out that, the absolute number of cancer deaths is climbing, around 10 million people globally each year. That's a huge, sobering number. But, and this is the key bit, when you adjust for things like population growth, and critically, the fact that people are living longer, the age-standardized death rate from cancer, it's actually dropped quite a bit over the last 30 years or so. It paints a very different picture, doesn't it?
It really does. And that distinction is, well, it's fundamental to understanding what's happening. If you adjust for age, basically, comparing across different time periods and populations, those age standardized rates were about a third lower in 2021 compared to 1990 globally. And that long-term decline is important because, it suggests progress was happening even before some of the really high-profile newer therapies hit the scene.
Okay, so if we are seeing that significant drop in the adjusted rates, what's behind it? What are the main things driving this progress?
Well, the article highlights a few key areas, and probably the single biggest impact, arguably, has come from cutting down on smoking. Dramatically cutting down. I mean, think about it. Smoking causes something like 85% of lung cancers and maybe 20% of all cancer deaths worldwide. That's just a massive target. And decades of public health efforts, policy changes, they've really shifted the needle on a population level. It shows what coordinated action can do.
Right. Huge impact from smoking reduction.
Yeah.
What about the medical side, the treatments, the detection?
Oh, absolutely crucial, too. We've seen really big advances in early detection, things like mammograms, colonoscopies, pap smears for cervical cancer. These aren't just finding cancer earlier. They're often catching precancerous changes. So you can intervene before it even becomes invasive cancer. That's huge. And then, yes, constant improvements in surgery, better drugs, targeted therapies, and of course the big breakthroughs in immunotherapy, harnessing the patient's own immune system. You put all that together. Well, one estimate suggests nearly 6 million cancer deaths were averted just in America between 1975 and 2020. And get this, over half of those averted deaths, they reckon that's down to less smoking.
Wow. So it really is a combination of factors, public health and medical tech working together. Any specific cancers where this is really clear?
Yeah, stomach cancer is a great example. It used to be a much bigger killer in richer countries. The big breakthrough came in the 90s, understanding the link to Helicobacter pylori infection. Once scientists figured that out, it led to testing, antibiotics, and rates just plummeted in many places. It shows how identifying a specific cause can lead to really effective, sometimes simple interventions.
Okay. So looking at prevention specifically, what stands out to you as maybe the most striking success, something that could be a model for the future?
For me, it has to be the HPV vaccine for cervical cancer. I mean, the story there is just incredible. Early 20th century, cervical cancer was a major killer of women. Then came the pap smear screening, a big step. But the game changer was realizing almost all cases are caused by the human papillomavirus, and then developing a vaccine against it. The results, just phenomenal. In the UK, they're reporting a 90% drop in cervical cancer cases among the first group of women vaccinated as teenagers by their early 20s.
90%. That's practically elimination for that group.
Exactly. It provides such a powerful template. If we can do this for a virus-driven cancer, what else could we target? It really fuels the hope for prevention.
Wow. And that success seems to be shifting the focus, as The Economist notes. Scientists are looking much harder at preventing cancer before it even starts, using genetics, biomarkers, new tech. It's exciting, especially when you think, as one expert in the article said, cancer doesn't just appear overnight. It often takes, 5, 10, maybe 15 years for those precancerous lesions to develop. That gives a window, right, what they call ample opportunity for medical intervention.
Precisely. And that change in mindset is, well, it could be transformative. It's pushing development of new preventive vaccines beyond HPV and also prophylactic drugs, chemoprevention, drugs like anastrozole, shown in trials to basically have breast cancer risk for certain high-risk women, or metformin, the diabetes drug, being looked at very closely for cancer prevention. The whole direction is shifting from reacting to cancer once it's established towards proactively intercepting it, catching it at the earliest possible stage, maybe even before it's truly cancer, being proactive, not just reactive.
Okay, so that's the optimistic case laid out by the economists. Progress is real, driven by smoking cessation, screening, treatments, and this exciting future of prevention. But let's dig a bit deeper now. If we put a more critical lens on this, are there parts of the story being maybe undersold or missed? Is it all quite that straightforwardly positive?
Yeah, that's where we need to introduce some important nuances. Because while age-standardized mortality is down, the incidence, the number of new cases being diagnosed, is actually heading in a worrying direction in some areas. Specifically, we're seeing a real rise in early-onset cancers, often linked to obesity. Globally, these are going up about 4% a year.
4%.
Yeah. And in the U.S., deaths linked to these obesity-related cancers have climbed nearly 6% per year since 1999. This suggests there's a kind of parallel epidemic driven by lifestyle factors that the article, well, it doesn't really dwell on, and the old smoking playbook doesn't quite fit this new challenge. And another major point, this progress isn't being shared equally. Rich countries are making strides, which is great, but that success can mask a widening global gap. Overall trends might look good, but absolute cancer deaths are still rising in many low and middle-income countries. Why? Lagging screening, not enough HPV vaccine coverage, just basic lack of access to diagnosis and treatment.
So the overall average hides big disparities.
Huge disparities. Even within rich countries, you see it. Like 5-year breast cancer survival in the U.S., 90% for white women, but only 82% for Black women. These aren't just stats. They represent real differences in outcomes based on access, socioeconomic, systemic issues.
That really underscores the equity issue. And it brings me back to something you mentioned. The article uses smoking control as the big success story, the blueprint. But you're saying this model might not really work for the next big challenge like obesity-related cancers.
Yeah.
These seem very different problems.
Fundamentally different, yes. And that's why it's so tricky. Obesity is now linked to maybe 40% of U.S. cancers. And here's the kicker. It's rising fastest exactly where tobacco control has been most successful. So it's not just swapping one bad habit for another. The problem with obesity is, well, the behavioral targets are much harder. There's no single quit button like there is for smoking. Addressing diet, especially ultra-processed foods, and sedentary lifestyles. It's tangled up in economics, urban design, food policy, advertising. It's a much more complex web.
Requires a totally different strategy.
Completely different. And on screening, The Economist does raise a fair point about overtreatment. That traditional screening finds a lot of stuff like breast lesions that might never actually become dangerous cancer. Maybe only 25% of common ones do.
Right, the harm versus benefit calculation.
Exactly. It's a real issue. But that critique might be getting outdated quite fast. We're seeing really promising innovations. AI tools to help sort through scans, blood tests that can detect multiple cancers early, these MCED tests. There was a study just this year, 2024, in Nature Medicine, showed an AI risk score could drastically cut the need for follow-up MRIs for breast cancer screening, down to just 7% of patients. And at the same time, it doubled the detection of cancers that were initially missed.
Wow, so potentially fewer unnecessary procedures and catching more real cancers.
That's the promise. It suggests these new precision tools could really change the game, making that over-screening argument less powerful going forward.
Okay, that's a fascinating development on the screening front. So let's connect this back to the future of prevention. The article seemed quite bullish on new vaccines, new drugs, but you're suggesting we should maybe temper our expectations. Are these solutions really just around the corner for widespread use?
Yeah, I think a reality check is needed there. The preventive vaccine pipeline is real, it's exciting science, but honestly, it's still pretty small relative to the overall cancer burden. Most candidates are in very early stages. Think phase I trials, like the Cleveland Clinic's triple-negative breast cancer vaccine or Oxford's ovarian vax for BRCA carriers. They haven't even dosed patients yet in some cases.
So years away from knowing if they work on a large scale.
Years, potentially decades, and comparing everything to HPV is maybe a bit misleading. HPV was a relatively clear target of virus. Most common, solid tumors. They have really complex origins, multiple genetic factors, much harder to make a single vaccine for. Even something promising like the MEC1 vaccine, well, In one trial, it helped reduce polyp recurrence, but only in a specific subset of patients, and only by about 38% for that group. It's progress, but it's incremental specific. Not quite the HPV miracle yet for most cancers. And then there's chemoprevention, those preventive drugs. The data can look good in trials. Metformin, for example, a big meta-analysis showed maybe a 28% lower risk of getting cancer overall, though the evidence quality was rated, moderate to low.
But translating that to the real world.
That's the hurdle. Adherence is tough. Asking healthy people to take a drug every day for years, potentially with side effects, even minor ones, it's a big ask. Look at aspirin for preventing colorectal cancer. The data looked promising, but uptake kind of stalled when the bleeding risks got more attention.
People weigh the risks and benefits differently when they feel healthy.
Exactly. Real-world use is often where these promising prevention strategies hit roadblocks. It's not just about the science. It's about human behavior and perception.
It really broadens the picture.
Yeah.
So beyond the specific medical tech, what other big factors influence cancer outcomes that maybe the economist piece didn't really get into? What are the sort of systemic blind spots?
Yeah, there are definitely some big ones. First off, just basic cost and capacity, all this amazing tech, whole genome sequencing, single-cell analysis. It's powerful, but it's mostly stuck in well-funded research labs or rich countries. In most low- and middle-income countries, the oncology budget is struggling just to cover basic pathology, let alone this cutting-edge stuff. So for billions of people, these advances are just irrelevant right now.
A huge gap in access.
A massive gap. Secondly, environmental factors, things we're exposed to every day. Ultrafine particles in air pollution, endocrine-disrupting chemicals in plastics and pesticides, even things like chronic night shift work. WHO's Cancer Agency classifies these as probable carcinogens. But they don't get the same policy focus or urgency that tobacco did, maybe because they're harder to pin down, more integrated into modern life.
Harder to regulate, harder to avoid individually.
Much harder. And finally, something we touched on with AI data privacy. These powerful AI tools need enormous amounts of data, images, genomic data to work well and, crucially, fairly without bias. But the rules around getting consent, using the data ethically, ensuring algorithms don't perpetuate existing health disparities, the regulations are lagging behind the technology. And that lag, plus public anxiety about privacy, could really slow down how quickly these potentially life-saving tools actually get rolled out to benefit everyone.
Okay, so pulling all these threads together, it sounds like the story is much more complex than just cancers becoming less deadly. While The Economist rightly highlights real important progress, especially that drop in age-adjusted mortality thanks to smoking cessation, screening, better treatments, your point suggests its optimistic view kind of underplays some major challenges. That worrying rise in obesity-linked cancers, the stark global inequities, and the fact that these future prevention tools, like vaccines, are probably further off than the headlines suggest.
That sums it up pretty well, I think. The reality isn't a simple, uniform march of progress. It looks more like a diverging future. A twin-track future, maybe? On one track, yes, incredible precision, prevention and treatment for those plugged into advanced, data-rich healthcare systems. But on the other track, a reality of stubbornly high, even rising cancer burdens in places where those tools that access just don't exist. It's a growing divide.
That really frames the challenge starkly. A twin-track future. So as our listeners reflect on all this complexity, this diverging reality, what do you think is the most critical step? What's most needed to genuinely shift the global cancer narrative so it benefits everyone, not just those fortunate enough to be on the fast track?